Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 6, Episode 14, presented by Market Dial. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, our second in a series of fantastic interviews conducted at Shop Talk in Las Vegas in the Wise Line podcasting studio. Our guest is Carrie Baker, President, Canada Goose.
Yeah, it was so, I felt like we were in one of the Canada Goose cold rooms that they have in their stores because it was quite chilly in the beach cabana / remote podcast studio. But that didn't interfere with it being a great conversation. You were the wisest person in the room because you had your Canada Goose toque on. That's where right. I was there shivering. Did not think to bring my Canada Goose gear to Las Vegas. But anyway, it was great conversation and a lot of fun to do it beachside.
We are counting down the days until we're together again in person. Microphones at the ready in Barcelona at the World Retail Congress. Get yourself a nice discount with our offer code in the show notes. Now, you're doing a double tap in Spain as well, right? Because you're speaking at Shop Talk Europe. You just coincidence, right? Barcelona twice in a couple of weeks. Now, you're there with a bunch of our friends of the pod, Melissa Gonzalez, Ann and Chris from OmniTalk, Ken Pilot. Congratulations, by the way, to Ken on the launch of his new podcast. Deb Weinswig, of course, because she has mastered somehow the art of being everywhere all the time. So you'll be on the stage there as well, yeah?
Yes, I will be on the stage the last day in the morning talking about outstanding retail experiences in store. And the person I will be talking to, there's actually going to be another person we're about to announce, but it's not quite public. I'll be speaking with Isabel Alberman, who's the global retail director of Comper, which is a shoe brand which has hundreds of stores, mostly in Europe, but there's several in the U.S. and other places as well. So yeah, should be a great time.
Oh, fantastic. Now let's get into the news. There's a bit of economic news, but there's a lot of retail news. So let's get right to the retail news. First of all, U.S. monthly sales reports up almost 3% ex gas. Break that down for us, because there's as you would often say, mileage will vary.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, we have to do our standard disclaimer that all the news stories have the headline that retail sales are down because they focus on the largely irrelevant month-over-month number.
We should write a bot for that for Twitter. We should, because it'll just save us a bit of time, right? Or just every time somebody posts that, we should just.
Exactly. But actually, in the more relevant year-over-year number, up 3% or 3%-ish, which is less than inflation. But you really have to go below the surface to kind of understand the dynamics and really what's relevant to our listeners here, because very few people are in every one of these product categories, right? So just really quickly, the leaders in terms of year-over-year sales growth was grocery, which was up 5.3%. Health and personal care, which has been a real leader for, I want to say close to 2 years now, I think, up 7.1. Non-store, which is sort of pure play e-commerce, not exactly, but the best proxy for digital sales, 12.3. And eating and drinking establishments up 13%. So we've talked a bunch about the kind of shift away from products to services. So you can definitely see it there. In terms of the laggards, and also this kind of is a pretty consistent picture for several months here. Consumer electronics and appliances down 10.3, furniture down 2.4, home and garden stores down 3.5, clothing stores down 1.8, department stores down 1.2. The thing that's interesting about consumer electronics and appliances in particular, furniture, I guess, as well, is that these big ticket purchases have been down for a while, and we generally think of that being largely this kind of pull forward of demand that occurred in COVID, as well as just kind of general slowdown in the home market. It'll be interesting to see when that starts to perhaps reverse, because you're not it's not like you're going to pull forward 5, 6, 7 years of demand. So that's one to watch to see when that starts to pivot, but it hasn't happened yet. And then the ones that were kind of meh, sporting goods, which has been pretty strong over the last couple of years, up only 3, and then general merchandise stores. So this is where Walmart, Target, some other stores will be in there, up just 2.4%. So quite a wide range, maybe a little bit more dispersion than we've seen in past months, as I recall. But I think, it definitely points to somewhat of a continuing deceleration, but, definitely this shift more to services and maybe generally speaking, not keeping pace with inflation.
Well, it's a big week in the retail world, or at least our analyst type retail world, with the release of the letter to investors from Amazon, which is always a must read kind of thing. It's a little geeky to say, but they're always interesting. Always, it's a letter that reflects much more broadly than on the performance of one retailer or one company. It is a kind of a bit of a statement of retail and other trends. So Mr. Jassy released his annual letter. What lots of interesting tidbits, to say the least. What jumped out at you?
Yeah, so this is Mr. Jassy's second one. These letters were started in 1997, and I would encourage people to go take a look at it. It's fairly in depth. They also include Bezos's original letter from 1997 at the bottom of the page. So scroll all the way down. I also heard him interviewed on CNBC. So got a couple of data points here, but I would say the overall message was, and I believe Amazon's earnings will be out in about 10 days, I think, from when this episode airs. So I think he was maybe telegraphing some things that might be in the earnings. But essentially, the big message was macro headwinds continuing to affect their business overall. But he was definitely signaling that corporate customers were pulling back on cloud computing spending. And of course, Amazon Web Services is a huge and profitable division for them. Mm-hmm. So he was kind of telegraphing that might be, still would be growing, but maybe not growing nearly as quickly as it has in the past. In terms of consumer spending, because AWS is, of course, B2B, still seeing headwinds there, particularly talked about a lot of trading down behavior. That was something we've talked about. It's in my predictions that there's this definite trading down behavior as customers are trying to, or consumers are trying to stretch their dollars more. He made some general comments about where he expected growth to come from in the future. So AWS, of course. The ad business is one that, we've talked about a bunch of times, continues to grow quite rapidly. He did say that international was going to continue to be an important area for them. That's an area where they've been growing at an above average rate, but they've also been losing a ton of money. So maybe he needed to say that, we're not slowing down there. And then from a retail standpoint, the two interesting things were how he talked about grocery and the commitment to grocery and the importance of having a physical presence. But what he pretty much said was that Amazon Fresh is not it, at least in its current form. He also made some interesting comments about Whole Foods, which I thought to a certain degree were obvious, but he pretty much said Whole Foods is not going to be the engine that's going to get them to be successful in the mass grocery space, and basically said that Whole Foods is making progress, but really that's not the growth engine. And I wondered whether he was signaling that perhaps Whole Foods is expendable. We talked about in the predictions my thought that perhaps Whole Foods gets spun off. I mean, he certainly didn't say that specifically, but it felt like he was setting the table a little bit there. And then really, healthcare and pharmacy as important growth areas as well. Noticeable in its omission was no discussion of Amazon Style. They've opened 2 stores there. I guess both of them opened last year. And as far as I know, they have not announced any additional locations, and there was no mention of it whatsoever in the letter. I guess the last thing I'll just point to, again, perhaps pretty obvious, but he made some pretty strong statements, particularly in the CNBC interview about how they've been using large language models and machine learning pretty extensively for a number of years. But he said, like a bunch of other senior leaders have talked about, that he really sees the potential of generative AI and related technologies really fundamentally changing just about everything about the customer experience in the years to come. And that, they were already using it extensively. They would be using more of it, and they have an opportunity to really leverage it not only on their website, the consumer-facing website, but also delivering it to clients through AWS. So I think he was trying to get a little bit of credit there for how involved they are in the AI arena already and how important it would be going forward.
All right. Well, let's get to the Wobbly Unicorn segment. And there's lots of news in the Wobbly Unicorn segment. Let's start out with Bonobos.
Yeah, well, we're recording this on Friday, and I woke up to the news that Bonobos has been sold to WHP, which is a holding company that owns the Toys R Us license and a bunch of other things, and Express for only $75 million. And that was actually a pretty shocking number
right? That's
to me.
haircut,
It's a huge
right?
haircut. Walmart bought Bonobos 5 or 6 years ago, I guess now, for a reported, I think, $310 million. So yes, that is a very, very significant markdown. But also in the scheme of things, given that Bonobos has, I think it's around 60 stores, they have some wholesale partnerships as well as what they sell online. I mean, that is not, I'm assuming, not even a multiple of one-time sales. So I assume the business must be quite negative on a cash flow basis, which I've kind of known or suspected. I mean, it was certainly when Walmart bought them. But that was a pretty shocking number. And I think at this point, given that Walmart's closed down Jet and they've sold off a couple of other things, I mean, their experimentation into pure play online retail, I mean, I think they've yielded a bunch of benefits. But in terms of it as an investment strategy,
they got some good people out of those things, but it's hard not to see them as right now as anything more than a distraction to the core business, the core growth of the business. Speaking of haircuts, Casper sells their Canadian business to Sleep Country, which is a very great retailer here in Canada, for $20.6 million. So to put that into context, Sleep Country bought a startup called Endy pre-pandemic, which is another mattress in a box, for $80 million. And you'd also find Purple mattresses in their showroom. So they bought them for $20 million, which is, nickels, basically. So what do you make of all that?
Well, I mean, again, I'm trying not to be too hyperbolic about it when talking about a disruptor apocalypse, but some of the most high-profile brands, and both Bonobos and Casper certainly were ones that 5 years ago were kind of considered on the very short list of brands that could be multi-billion-dollar brands, are really getting sold at fire sale prices. I mean, I can't quite equate Casper's prior valuation, other than saying, well, Canada is probably about 10%, the old kind of rule of thumb. But to me, that's a shockingly low number. And I think it really suggests that Casper, which is now private, is really looking to focus and stop the hemorrhaging of cash, I assume. I mean, again, not a lot of details on the specifics, but given that price, I would assume it's a business. I mean, they're really just buying the assets. They're not buying a business per se.
Buying the rights to the brand, basically. It's like a licensing deal for $20 million. I had a funny story. I was hosting a panel at a small conference here in Canada, just pre-pandemic, and it was right when Casper was really hot. Right, everybody was talking about they're disrupting the whole sleep industry and they're going to be huge. And I looked down as one of my panelists was talking, and in the front row, there's these people scowling, like they were not enjoying the content. And I later learned they were from Sleep Country, and they're like, this is nonsense. And turns out a couple of years later, they were right. Let's talk about some other earnings came out. Let's talk about Rent the Runway earnings.
Well, another wobbly unicorn here. Here's a company that has fallen from a very high valuation. They reported just this week that the good news part, I guess, because this is a business where they rent. People don't know they rent higher end fashion items, basically for special occasions and the like. And so that was a business that was very, very challenged during the peak of the COVID times, for sure. So they've been starting to run some good sales increases. So they were up 18% year over year. One of the things that really struck me was how small a business this is. It's $270 million in sales, which honestly is like, a good Neiman Marcus store and a Nordstrom store together. Like, that's not a massive business in the scheme of things. So that was I hadn't really focused on that. They have their active subscribers growing. So those are positive trends, but their net loss, which was cut, is still quite significant. I mean, a negative 35% operating margin. And they've set a goal for reducing their cash consumption, which has been quite high, by 50% over the next year. But this is a business that's really, really pretty, quite far from breaking even. And I think their stock is down like 95% or something over the last year or so. So we're continuing to see a lot of struggles from these once high flying brands to to get to profitability, even when they've got positive sales growth.
Last thing, I saw this clickbaity headline, and you had to react to it. The UBS predicting 50,000 stores to close, blaming e-commerce by 2027. I mean, any quick comments on that?
Well, two things. One is UBS, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, predicted that 80,000 stores would close by, I think, this year. And that was not even remotely close to being correct. I think they missed that by about 70,000. So one can question nothing against UBS, but they do not have a very good track record of predicting store closings. The other thing, I do think quite a lot of stores will close. I don't have any real ability to predict the exact number, but I think it is not really because of e-commerce. It is because of the collapse of the middle, which the stores that are struggling, for the most part, are not struggling because of e-commerce. Number one, nothing prevents them from participating in e-commerce. So, if JCPenney is struggling, it's not because they don't have JCPenney.com, right? It's because their value proposition isn't strong enough, and their real estate strategy isn't. Their stores aren't where people are buying. The lack of e-commerce for, say, TJ Maxx has not, kept TJ Maxx from peeling off billions of dollars of sales from department stores. Yeah, Primark. So e-commerce, generally speaking, does suggest you need less space. But I think it's much more about the mediocrity of the value proposition, where the real estate is located. And, in the U.S., we're still greatly over-stored. So some of this is an ongoing, 20-year plus capacity reduction. But anyway, I'm willing to bet that number will not be nearly as high as they predict.
All right. Now, just before we get to our great interview with Carrie Baker from Canada Goose, a quick thanks to Carrie, Alex, and Courtney from Canada Goose for being open to the experience of a different location for our podcasting studio. And now let's hear from our presenting sponsor. There are two types of retailers: those that are committed to transforming at the speed of disruption, and those that aren't. If you're a retailer that implements significant changes by intuition, you may soon join the Hall of Shame of executives who bet the farm on initiatives that ultimately failed, so maybe consider brushing up your resume. But if you're a retailer hungry for a better way to gain useful insights on the impacts of your store layout, design, and strategic initiatives, you need to know MarketDial. MarketDial is an easy-to-use testing platform that emboldens great decisions, leading to reliable, scalable results. With MarketDial, you can be confident in the outcome of your in-store pilot initiatives before rolling them out across your fleet. Validate your remarkable ideas with MarketDial's in-store testing solution. The proof is in the testing. Learn more at marketdial.com. That's marketdial.com. Carrie, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast here at Shop Talk in the Wise Line Podcasting Studio. That's a bit of a mouthful. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks so much for joining. I mean, I'm really looking forward to this. I've been a big fan of the brand for a long, long time. I wish we had a few more of the brand's items here on a somewhat colder
Today we need them.
Turns out this is the remote cold room.
Yeah, that's right. We got the cold room here. Maybe you could sponsor the podcast next year and just outfit
Absolutely.
the podcast. You can be a great outfitter.
Me and Mother Nature, we're close. I asked for this weather.
Yeah, sometimes we are blessed. Well, listen, let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what you do for a living.
Sure. So, Carrie Baker, and I'm the president of Canada Goose, and I've been with the brand for now almost 11 years. And so I started, Canada Goose was a client of mine. So I was I came up through the communications world.
Okay.
And Danny, our current chairman and CEO, he was my client, and one day convinced me to come to the dark side, in-house. And it's been tremendous. It's been a rocket ship.
Yeah.
So 11 years. When I started, we were less than 100 million. I remember celebrating that milestone like it was the biggest thing we were ever going to see.
Yeah.
And last year we crossed $1 billion. So
Wow.
established as a performance luxury brand, which is kind of a fun space to be in because there's not a lot of other brands there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, more than a familiar name for many, but not everyone, and not everyone knows your scope and scale, and you've got stores around the world now. So give listeners a 411 about Canada Goose.
So Canada Goose, as I said, we're a performance luxury brand, and that's a space that we have carved out for ourselves. It's firmly fits in functional. You've seen our jackets. You're wearing our toque. You've seen what we do. We make products that work, but they're of the highest quality. They're made in Canada, high craftsmanship, high touch manufacturing, and that dictates a very luxury experience. And so we're kind of in the sweet spot that really there's not a lot of other players to be, and so we get to create our own story. And what does that matter? How does that show up? Whether it's retail, whether it's online, whether it's in a wholesale partner. So we've really taken that by the horns and really gone for it and turned it into something that nobody's really seen before. If you think about it, there's not a lot of Canadian luxury brands that are coming out of Canada, and that's a really unique space that we get to define.
Well, it's a unique space overall, whether it's coming out of Canada or not, right? And from the heritage of the Blue Jacket and the polar expeditions to the top movie sets around the world, and now you have a mix of wholesale and direct to consumer. So how many stores and how many countries?
So today we're going to end this year with 51 of our own stores. So that has been we opened our first store in 2016. So it's been, we're still very early in our journey, but it's been a fast journey on the DTC growth. And that is definitely key to our growth as a brand.
Right on.
So we have 51 stores around the permanent stores. Of course, we have pop-ups and temporary stores and activations. But you're right, we had a really interesting start of, being an authentic brand that probably only a handful of people in the north, airline pilots up in Nunavut knew about, to then showing up on movie sets around the world.
So I've got some background in the luxury industry. I was at Neiman Marcus for many years, so I have some sense of kind of the magic and the storytelling of pulling together a luxury brand. You mentioned a performance luxury brand, so that is an interesting way to think about brand positioning. So can you just give us a little bit about how you think about all the ways you pull together this remarkable branding, the whole experience, just like what's the secret sauce to making it all work together, particularly now that you've moved out of that more niche category to not a broad market, but a broader market?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there isn't one thing. I think if there was just a playbook that every company would do that, lots of brands want to be luxury. But for us, it starts with product. You have to, no luxury company goes out there and just makes stuff.
Yeah.
And we take that to heart because we started in the performance and functional. We've never lost that. So even though, price points move up, even though our adjacencies change, even though the style might evolve, we make things that work. They're going to protect you in an environment, whether it's wind, rain, cold, snow. They have to work. And so that is something that we absolutely hold ourselves to, no matter how we grow, no matter what new category we get into. That is something that it's a promise that we will deliver to every customer every time.
And how do you, one thing that sometimes, I don't know if you've heard this, but sometimes when we think about luxury brands or historically about branding, there's the sense of there's the functional part of it and then kind of everything else, and I'm exaggerating a little bit to make a point, but kind of everything else is image. The $50 handbag carries around stuff just as well as the $2,000 handbag, right? But because you bring in this performance dimension, does that change the way you think about marketing or the way you think about how you go to market?
It does, because and it goes back to our values. So one of our values is authenticity. So we know who we are. We know where we come from. We know why we exist. And I think that makes you make different choices, whether it's product, whether it's how you go to market, whether it's where you go to market. We're not trying to be something we're not. And so I think that is something that comes from the top. We talk about it all the time. We don't cut corners. We don't make cheap choices. Sure, you're going to get a t-shirt. Is it the best t-shirt in the world? It better be. It doesn't necessarily mean it needs to reinvent the t-shirt category like we have with jackets or with footwear.
Yeah.
But it has to be high quality. It has to be made in the best place. It has to have the craftsmanship and the quality of material. So that is something that's just unwavering in our commitment.
Now, since you've been with the brand for a while and you've grown so much, from a leadership standpoint and a culture standpoint, has it been challenging to carry that culture through as you get more spread out and you just have, 10x the number of employees I imagine you had 5 or 6 years ago?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say it's a challenge. It's a focus for us, for sure. It comes from the top. Danny, our CEO, is very much about culture. He knows the business. His grandfather started this business.
Right.
He's done every part. Well, he hasn't been a sewer, but he's done almost every part of the company. But for him, it's all about this must be a great place to work. And so again, based on who he hires, the way we hire, the idea that, back to what I was saying about authenticity, we're not trying to be something else, but it is a big focus for us to make sure that we're developing, especially as we came out of the situation that we all came out of with pandemic. It was a conscious effort to make sure that we're bringing people in, they understand our values, they have an opportunity to live our values, even though we're all remote or separate. You might find different flavors in different countries or different markets, but at the baseline, a Canada Goose employee is very similar around the world, and there's something special and magical about that.
Well, I think also, I find sometimes cultures, they build on, when you have great success, it's fun to be part of such an exciting story and the growth and the innovation and all those kinds of things. I wanted to go back to, you were talking about your direct-to-consumer strategy, and there's been so much, I know you're just getting to the conference here, but it seems like over the last few years, but in particular already at Shop Talk, people are talking about, is D2C a business? Is it a channel? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm curious the evolution of getting more into your own stores, I assume really dialing up your online presence as well. Can you just kind of take us through that journey, how you're thinking about it going forward? And I guess the trade-offs between, it's not wholesale versus direct-to-consumer, right? So how do you think about that at Canada Goose?
The way we think about the channel, what you're going to call it, an ecosystem, channels, a business, we believe that they have distinct, meaningful, and complementary roles to play. So wholesale, obviously, as a manufacturer until 2014, and we only went through wholesale,
right.
And they helped build our brand. They were instrumental, and they still are today, and we see that being a very key part of our business. But as we are introducing online, we started in 2014 as an e-commerce business, then in 2016 added our first 2 stores, Toronto, New York, and then since then have obviously grown immensely. But you're right, there are trade-offs, but it's not one versus the other. It really is that complementary, and depending on the market that you're in, it may be different. Where is demand? Where's awareness? So obviously, you can imagine a brand like Canada Goose has very high awareness in Canada. So the opportunity to grow DTC faster than in, say, EMEA or in Asia, where they didn't know us as well at the time, you have an opportunity that's different. So it might be just on a different time scale.
Yeah.
But I would say wholesale is always going to play a meaningful role for us. We need to know why we're with them. It can never just be a volume play. So either they're giving us geographic reach, or they're introducing us to a customer that we don't see through our own channels, or we haven't been able to attract yet. Or they're giving us an opportunity and license to test a new product because they already have, for footwear, they already have people coming to shop for footwear. That gives us an understanding of what the customer's looking for, how can we play in that space. So we'll always be meaningful. It's just our focus, as most brands, I think especially in luxury, when you look at what the consumer wants, we want to be able to be available how and when and where the consumer wants. And so that's online, that's also omni-channel. I know we've been talking about that for years, but it really, it's table stakes, but we're just starting on that. And that, to me, so it doesn't really matter whether e-commerce is growing as fast as stores or vice versa. It's about how do we make sure that we're delivering on that experience that we want customers to have.
Sure, but it's also, I would imagine, it's a huge advantage to be able, coming out of a manufacturing origin, to have a direct relationship with the end consumer. Way back when I worked in manufacturing, and I would just say, casually talking about our customers, people would say, oh, you mean like consumers? Like, no, our customers are not the consumer. Like, we care about creating demand from the end consumer, but our customer are grocery stores or whatever it might be. So I imagine that's giving you data maybe that you don't have, in a different way of interacting with customers. That's quite powerful.
100%. It's powerful. And I think the one thing that we have been always lucky at, or not lucky, fortunate, I would say, is that even though as a wholesaler, or even as a manufacturer that sold only to wholesale, we did things that engaged the consumer because we had to build the demand to show wholesalers that we were a brand that consumers wanted.
Right.
And so, I'm going back way back, but Danny, again, our CEO, he used to put seed people that were in cold places so that when you walked, if you were walking up to a hotel and the bellman everyone else was freezing and he's wearing a Canada Goose jacket, it builds demand in a different way. So we were fortunate that we always understood our customer is the consumer. And so that we built it that way. And of course, it gives us lots of data and understanding what they're buying, how they're buying, what they want to see next from us.
Yeah.
Where do we have permission to play? But it also, I think the one thing, especially in luxury, is we know our story best. So you might have the best wholesale partner in the world and they're doing a great job, but they're not going to carry your full assortment. They're not going to present it in exactly the right way for us because they're looking at their customer. Yeah. So for us, we're trying to redefine or define a different type of luxury, and we think that we're the best at that. So that's why there's interest in building out our stores. And when you come to a Canada Goose store, it's a very different experience than finding us at Nordstrom or another one of our partners.
Harry Rosen or wherever.
Right, exactly.
I was showing you before we got on mic that I love to feature your cold rooms often in my keynotes, because I think and the reason I do it, I just love it. I think it's a cool idea, but I love it for 2 reasons. One is, to me, I talk about remarkable retail, which is literally something, that's distinctive, relevant, and people talk about it. So it's one of those things that I think just creates a lot of buzz and, virality or whatever, good for the gram, et cetera. But the reason I, in particular, include it is because it's also a real great way of demonstrating the value of the product. It's not just a gimmick. It's
Absolutely.
a very tangible thing. So I'm curious just in general, the process for innovation at Canada Goose, but in particular, if you were willing to share how that idea came about and what it's meant for you.
Yes, I love it. So cold rooms and snow rooms now, we have some that produce snow overnight, and people, that people are coming from climates and environments where they've never touched and seen snow. So to come into one of our rooms and to have that experience, you're right. Yes, it's good for the gram. They have some fun. They take some pictures, but that is a memorable experience that you're not getting at other, especially not luxury.
Yeah.
Typical traditional luxury can be very cold, very austere and pompous, whereas we are the opposite. We want it to be inclusive, although we want to be exclusive as a brand, but it's not exclusionary.
Exclusively?
Inclusively exclusive. Yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
I like that.
So we want people to come in. We invite them into our store. You're greeted warmly when you come into the door, even if you have to wait. God forbid you have to wait at one of our doors to get in. You're going to be greeted by somebody. They're going to ask you what you're here for. They're going to set that all up, and then they're going to walk you through the store. You're going to see the Inuit art collection that we have. You're going to be invited into a cold room.
Or the heritage jackets up on the wall or whatever.
That's right. Storytelling, because we're an experiential storytelling brand. And so back to the idea was that we used to do, as I said, I came from the communications world, and so we used to do these events where you'd get to test and get to try, whether it was a rain room. So it really was an authentic way to bring it into the brand for anybody, whether it was a reporter, whether it was an investor, to, again, touch and feel. That is a very powerful experience when if you've never been truly warm and you put on a Canada Goose heavyweight down jacket, like that blows your mind. Really, and so we wanted to have that aha feeling, that moment as we went into the retail and do it in, you're right, not a gimmicky way, not in a schlocky way. We wanted to do something that was real. People make decisions based on how they feel in that room. They're standing in there, whether it's footwear, whether it's a knitwear, now it's a jacket. They have so many choices, but they get to make that choice and leave the store feeling very confident in their purchase.
I wanted to tap into your communications background. I'm going off script here a little bit. So I spent a bunch of time at Hudson's Bay Company.
Yeah.
And we used to think a lot about the connection between Brand Canada and Hudson's Bay because they were very closely aligned. So how do you think about that? I mean, can't Brand Canada, different parts of the world, trades higher or lower on any given day? You both benefit from all the associations with Canada, cold, and they know how to handle the cold. But at the same time, there is potentially some downside in being so closely named. How do you think about that?
It's been, we talk a lot about it. It's been by far and large a positive thing for us. I think there's also, it's not just the cold, it's the idea of the Canadians. So forget the country and the environment, which is natural and everyone gets that. But it's also the warmth of Canadians, the personality, the welcoming nature of Canadians. And so that reputation around the world has by far and large been positive.
Sure.
You're always looking at it going, okay, is this going to be an upside or a downside? Yeah, but again, generally the people forget the politics and all that. But generally people understand that they've never met a Canadian that they didn't like, so it's been pretty good. I mean,
Steve, is that true?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything on mic.
You might say something different after today.
Yeah, that's right. Off mic, we'll chat.
No, but I think the other part of that is because it's not just Canada Goose as in the name, it's made in Canada, right? That is
you're deeply entrenched into that.
Deeply entrenched, and people
brand.
Understand, especially it's interesting, where people understood the value of made in Canada was not Canada first. It's externally. So we would be going to trade shows in Europe where people understood, oh yeah, okay, so they think of the Great White North, they think about Canadians, craftsmanship, of course they know cold. So the idea that this jacket would be made in Canada, Beautiful. They've instantly got it.
Not to be too much of a digression, but don't you think there's also a point where people don't take brands so literally? Like I always say, Pottery Barn.
Right.
Sells neither pottery
nor barns.
Nor barns.
Nor in a barn.
It's not in a barn. Crate and Barrel. There's names that you may know there's an origin as to why they were originally called that made some sense. But over time, I've said this to people and they're like, oh, I've never thought about that. Or Banana Republic, there are lots of these names where the literal name not only isn't relevant, but it like actually doesn't make any sense.
They're not trying to find meaning in it.
Yeah, but clearly they've established brands that people understand and you like or you don't like, but they're powerful brands. So I do think there's a point at which you become so powerful that it is the overall experience, and nobody's sitting there to say, well, Canada yes or Canada no.
No, exactly. And especially when you think about geographically, as we've grown, I don't think people are walking into a store in Nanjing and thinking, oh, Canada, right? It's just they know Canada Goose, the brand, and they have certain associations and they fall in love with our product or our experience, but they're not actually thinking.
Right, but then for the people that spend the time to think about it, it makes perfect sense, and there's a lot to leverage,
Absolutely.
Let me flip that narrative or flip the script a little bit. So off mic, I was saying I had the pleasure of being on a panel with Harris from your team, and we didn't talk about it too much on that panel, but we were thinking about counterfeit product and how do you authenticate product. Talk a little bit about that, because the downside of being so popular is that people start to kind of try to knock the product off. And I know from the past you spend a lot of time and mental energy protecting your IP. So just share a little bit of that for us.
We do, and I think it's one of the times when imitation is not the greatest form of flattery. We do. We take it very seriously, and I think that's no matter what brand, but particularly brand is everything in your experience. And so if people are seeing fakes out there, and it just starts to erode at the brand. And so we do a lot of education with the consumer to say this is a fake. This is, you can go on our website, either slide, there's tools, there's verification tools. So we want people to have confidence in what they're buying and know the signs of what that is. And then we also spend an inordinate amount of time working with government officials,
chasing
training.
That stuff down,
just training them. Also, it's education, but training them on when they're seeing labels come from China to we ship from Canada to China or vice versa. So it's something we do. We want to make sure that we're protecting. Lots of brands do it. I think the thing for us is that you have to watch it, but you could go broke trying to protect it.
Chase every
right?
single
And
one,
so you have to be strategic with it. Where are the points of entry? But it's we spend a lot of time, significant time.
I mean, there's some practical, like if it's a $100 Canada Goose jacket online, it's probably not.
It's not the real thing.
Not the real thing. Too good to believe.
No, and that's part of our education too, right? To be talking about, we don't go on sale. If you're seeing a Canada Goose website that looks exactly like ours, but there's big price discounts, and that is not a Canada Goose. And so it's that education in different markets that we go to that we try and make sure that people understand what they're buying.
Let's talk about a new initiative you've launched, which is the resale market. So tell us about that. Why now? Is there a momentum that you perceived? I'm sure you're very customer focused. I'm sure customers have been asking for it.
Absolutely.
So talk about that.
I'm very excited. Thank you for asking because it's my favorite thing. CG Generations. So Canada Goose Generations, we launched at the end of January with just online in the U.S. market. And so that's our chance to really live our purpose. And of course, it's a sustainable way to give access to people and unlock some new product, not new to them, products that, we are very exclusive. You can't get our products everywhere. And so for them to find a special piece and only have one of one, it's exciting. I think why now? We've been watching the market for a while, watching what people are doing, whether looking at third parties, the Vestiaires, the Real Reals of the world. And I think, again, back to the idea that it's a way for us to engage and present the best story versus somebody else doing it. So often we get questions on, why didn't you just go through somebody else? I think for us, it's powerful to have that whole ecosystem, to be able to engage with people, to understand why they're buying refurbished goods. And I think you'll see, I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's also a very heavy Gen Z. They care about those things. They care about thrifting. They care about not adding new, quote unquote, waste to the environment. And so for them to be seeing us and finding something that's great, that of value, maybe at a little bit of lower price point, that's not why we're doing it, but for them it's a little more accessible, and it just speaks to their values. And so I think that's a huge part for us of why now. So I'm really excited. I think this can be very powerful tool, how to engage with them differently, seeing how customers are buying. I think lots of people don't know what the end state is going to look like, but you have to try. And
it's such an interesting initiative, and I'll pass the mic back to Steve in a second. But I mean, for years I was like, I want you guys to tell me which dry cleaners are authorized to dry clean my jacket. And finally you posted that.
Yes.
And now, my jacket, which is probably 10 years old now, looks brand new, right? Yeah. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. It's just for you.
It might be time for a new one, though, Michael, I think.
Well, maybe, but
Well, this is it's very interesting, and this is both the power, but the interesting part about a resale is like our jackets are products, but particularly our heavyweight down jackets, they're made for a lifetime. They come with a very powerful warranty. And so it's not like you need a new one because it stopped functioning or it stops looking good, but it's the opportunity to get into something new, to maybe try a different color, a different pattern without sort of starting from scratch. But I could talk about it for a long time because I'm really excited about it.
So that makes me think one other question before we start to wrap up is what is the role of fashion? You know, I was just thinking about, you know, when you sell such durable investment quality, you know, however you want to think about that, that's awesome from the customer standpoint, and there's lots of great things about it. But at the same time, getting that frequency. So do you think about fashion as a way to do that? Do you think about product line extensions as a way to do it? Like what's that next tier of growth, I guess?
It's not, we would never say fashion. We're definitely not a fashion company. We don't do fashion shows. We don't have new collection that you say, oh, here's the spring summer collection.
Right.
And I think it's obviously purposeful, but it's very powerful for us to have a business model where lots of your product, 70% of our products carry over season after season. How we think about newness is, of course, we want to add freshness. We want to give people a reason to come back in store, come back online. Yeah. Colors, prints. When you look at some of our iconic pieces or heritage pieces that have been around for a long time, we'll work with a collaborative partner and we'll launch a new version of it. It's still the same jacket. We're not reinventing the wheel, but it's got a crazy print.
What you did with the Inuit collection.
That's a little bit different with Adagi. Project Adagi. But this is more on the collabs front. Adagi is a way to bring people in from a different angle and a different reason. I love that project. It was one of the things we launched a couple of years ago, and it's so near and dear to my heart. But so newness, we definitely think about freshness, but category extensions, absolutely. That's a key part of our growth strategy for the next 5 years is introducing new categories faster. So our first category that we launched in 2012, 2013 was lightweight down. And that is now a very meaningful part of our business. And now as we've introduced knitwear, apparel, footwear,
rain jackets,
wind jackets. And so that's because people love our brand and they know that what we're going to make is going to work for them.
Right.
They ask us, and we listen to them a lot of, okay, you kept my body warm. How about my feet?
Right.
I know you guys will deliver on warmth. So that's also a way for us to extend and bring people back into the
Makes a ton of sense. So anything else before we let you go? Anything else on the horizon? Any news you want to break or other things you're working on that we haven't covered yet?
Recommerce is the brand new for us. So again, I'm very excited to see how that goes. We're looking at launching that in Canada in June and July this summer. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how people come back to the ecosystem. The other new thing that we're working on this fall is launching travel retail. And so we know our customer, they travel and they travel a lot, and that's a luxury consumer. And so that's a brand new area for us how do we get people when they're in transit rather than before they leave or when they arrive at the destination.
That's interesting.
And so that'll be a really... that'll be a fun project, starting with sort of international hubs where people are traveling the most. And so that's a new venture that will happen in the fall.
Wow. Well, plenty of exciting things going on, obviously. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Canada Goose has been, I love talking about the brand because I think it's one of those brands, from my perspective, that just really knows, and you've said this, who you're about, who the product is for, what makes you remarkable, and you've got that discipline, but at the same time willing to push the edges a little bit as well. So thanks so much, Carrie, for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of Shop Talk, and we'll see you out in the world.
Appreciate it.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to drop us that 5-star review. New episodes of Season 6, presented by Marketile, will show up each and every Tuesday. Be sure to tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn, and you can catch up with Steve and me at the World Retail Congress, April 25th in Barcelona. Until then, safe travels, everyone.